The day my father slapped my uncle across the face, nobody in my family gasped. They just stared at the old wooden shed behind Grandpa Walter's farmhouse. Because everyone knew. That fight had never really been about land. It had always been about that shed. "You touch that lock," Dad said, breathing hard, "and I'll drag you off this property myself." Uncle Raymond rubbed his cheek and laughed. "You still protecting a pile of rotten wood?" "Walter's gone, Ben. You can't hide behind his rules anymore." Dad didn't answer. He simply looked at the shed like it was still alive. That was the first time I realized. My father wasn't protecting a building. He was protecting a secret. 3 days earlier, we'd buried my grandfather. Walter Hayes had been 86. He'd spent nearly 60 years living on the same piece of land outside Cedar Ridge, Ohio. The farmhouse wasn't much to look at anymore. The porch leaned to one side. The paint had almost disappeared. The fields hadn't grown crops in years. But the property had become valuable after developers started buying land around the county. Very valuable. Grandpa had refused every offer. He always smiled and said the same sentence. "When I'm gone, the land will decide who deserves it." Nobody knew what that meant. Not even Dad. Or at least, that's what I believed. My name is Ethan Hayes. I was 32 years old, worked as a freelance photographer in Chicago, and visited Grandpa only twice a year. That fact still filled me with guilt. The last conversation we'd had replayed in my mind every night. He'd been sitting outside the shed with 2 mugs of coffee. "You know why I like this place?" he'd asked. I shrugged. "The memories?" He smiled. "No." He tapped the wooden wall beside him. "Because wood never lies." I laughed. "I have absolutely no idea what that means." "You will someday." Those were the last words Grandpa ever said to me. At the funeral, I kept searching the crowd, expecting to see him standing somewhere with that old denim jacket and crooked smile. Instead, all I saw were relatives calculating property values. The reading of the will happened the following afternoon. Grandpa's attorney, Margaret Collins, adjusted her glasses before opening the envelope. "The farmland and residence will be divided equally among Benjamin Hayes, Raymond Hayes, Susan Miller, and any surviving grandchildren upon liquidation." Before she finished, Uncle Raymond grinned. "I told you. Sell everything." Aunt Susan nodded immediately. "There's no reason to keep any of it." Dad folded his arms. "What about the shed?" Margaret looked back at the document. "There is one additional instruction." The room became silent. She cleared her throat. "The storage shed behind the farmhouse is not to be opened, destroyed, relocated, or sold until Benjamin Hayes has passed away or gives written permission." Raymond exploded. "What kind of nonsense is that?" Susan frowned. "So Ben controls the entire property now?" Margaret shook her head. "No. Only the shed." Dad looked stunned. I didn't know about this." "You expect us to believe that?" Raymond snapped. "You've always been his favorite." Dad stood. "I'm telling you the truth." Raymond slammed his fist onto the table. "That stupid shed is sitting on the best part of the land. Developers already offered nearly $4 million. $4 million. The number echoed through the room. I watched everyone's expressions change. Not grief. Greed. Only Dad looked afraid. underscore 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 underscore. Later that evening, I found him sitting alone on Grandpa's porch. The sun was disappearing behind the trees. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded without looking at me. "I miss him." "So do I." Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. Finally, I asked the question burning inside me. Why didn't Grandpa want anyone touching the shed? Dad's eyes stayed fixed on the distant building. "I honestly don't know." "You've never been inside?" "Not since I was 16. I frowned. "What happened?" His jaw tightened. He locked it. And told me never to go back. "For no reason," he said. Dad stopped talking. "What did he say?" "He said some doors should stay closed until people are ready to hear the truth." A cold breeze crossed the yard. I looked toward the shed. It wasn't large. Maybe 15 feet wide. Old cedar boards. Rusted metal roof. One tiny window covered from the inside. Nothing special. Yet every member of my family kept staring at it as if it were a vault filled with gold. That night I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, headlights swept across my bedroom window. I looked outside. A black pickup truck rolled slowly toward the back of Grandpa's property. No headlights now. Just moonlight. I recognized the driver immediately. Uncle Raymond. "What are you doing?" I whispered. He climbed out carrying bolt cutters. My heart started pounding. I grabbed my flashlight and ran outside barefoot. By the time I reached the shed, Dad was already there. I had no idea how he'd gotten there so fast. Raymond froze. "So now you're guarding it at midnight?" Dad stepped between him and the door. "I warned you. You think there's money in there? I don't know what's in there." "Liar." "I'm not lying." Raymond raised the bolt cutters. Dad didn't move. For several long seconds. Nobody breathed. Then another voice shattered the silence. "Don't." We all turned. Attorney Margaret Collins was walking across the grass. She held a sealed envelope in one hand. Her face had gone completely pale. "I wasn't supposed to deliver this until next week," she said quietly. "But after what I saw tonight..." She looked directly at my father. "Walter left one final letter." Dad swallowed. "What does it say?" Margaret hesitated. Then she spoke the sentence that changed everything. "It says the key to the shed isn't hidden on this property." She looked at me. "It says only Ethan knows where I've been keeping it." For a moment, nobody said a word. I stared at Margaret. "I don't understand," I said. "I don't have any key." "You might not realize you do," she replied softly. Dad looked just as confused as I felt. Raymond let out a bitter laugh. "This old man's still playing games from the grave." Margaret ignored him and opened the sealed envelope. "This letter is addressed to Ethan." She handed it to me. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and pipe tobacco, the same scent that always clung to Grandpa's jacket. My hands shook as I unfolded it. "Dear Ethan, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and your family has already started arguing." That part was easy to predict. You're wondering why I trusted you instead of your father. The truth is, I trusted your father too much. Look inside the camera bag I gave you on your 21st birthday. You'll find what you've been carrying for 11 years. Don't open the shed until everyone who wants to sell this land is standing together. Some truths should never be whispered. They should be heard by everyone. Love. Grandpa. My stomach tightened. The old leather camera bag. I still had it. It sat in my apartment closet in Chicago. I'd used it for years before buying newer equipment. I never remembered seeing a key. Raymond rolled his eyes. So we wait while the boy drives halfway across the country. Dad folded the letter carefully. We're doing exactly what Walter asked. Oh, of course we are, Raymond snapped. Because whatever Walter wanted mattered more than the rest of us. No, Dad answered quietly. It mattered because he earned that respect. For the first time, Raymond had no comeback. He simply stormed toward his truck, tires throwing gravel as he sped away. But before he disappeared down the road, I noticed something strange. He wasn't angry anymore. He looked nervous. The next morning, Dad insisted on driving to Chicago with me. 6 hours passed mostly in silence. Rain tapped against the windshield. Finally, Dad spoke. Your grandfather loved you. I know. He saw something in you. I smiled. He also beat me at chess every Christmas. Dad chuckled. He cheated. I looked over. Grandpa cheated. He distracted people. Dad laughed for the first time since the funeral. He'd ask about your job right before making the winning move. We both laughed. The sound felt unfamiliar. Then Dad's smile faded. I should have visited him more. You visited every week. Not really. What do you mean? I brought groceries. I fixed fences. But. His voice cracked. I stopped asking him how he was. Neither of us spoke again for miles. Back in my apartment, I pulled the dusty leather camera bag from the closet. It looked exactly as Grandpa had given it to me. Scratched. Faded. Still sturdy. Dad watched while I emptied every pocket onto the table. Lenses. Memory cards. Old batteries. Cleaning cloths. Nothing. I guess he remembered wrong. Dad picked up the bag. It feels heavier than it should. He pressed inside the bottom lining. Something clicked. We looked at each other. There wasn't a pocket there before, I whispered. Using a small knife, Dad carefully lifted a loose stitch. A thin brass key slid into his palm. Along with a tiny cassette tape. Not a flash drive. Not a CD. A cassette. There was a handwritten label. Start here. Dad's face turned white. What is it? I don't know. But Walter never labeled anything unless it mattered. We stopped at a small electronics repair shop on the way back. To my surprise, the owner still had an old cassette player. He inserted the tape. Static filled the room. Then. Grandpa's voice. Clear. Calm. Older than I remembered. If you're hearing this, then Ethan found the key. Dad grabbed the edge of the counter. I knew this day would come. Before you open the shed. You deserve to know why it exists. There was a long pause. In 1978. Our family almost destroyed itself. Dad frowned. I was 13. Grandpa continued. Money disappeared from the farm account. Everyone blamed Raymond. Raymond. The room suddenly felt smaller. But Raymond wasn't guilty. Dad whispered. What? The real thief confessed to me that same year. Another pause. I recorded the confession. The tape clicked. Silence. Then Grandpa spoke again. I realized something that day. People lie to protect themselves. But when they think nobody else will ever hear them, they tell the truth. The recording ended. Dad stood frozen. Who confessed? I asked. There wasn't enough tape, the repair shop owner said. Dad looked at the cassette. No. He whispered. No, Dad. We raced back to Cedar Ridge. Word somehow spread before we arrived. Every relative was already waiting outside the farmhouse. Raymond, Susan, their spouses, even cousins who hadn't visited Grandpa in years. A black luxury SUV sat beside the barn. A developer had come in person. Raymond smiled when he saw us. Finally. I held up the brass key. I found it. The entire yard fell silent. Margaret stepped forward. Walter's instructions were clear. She looked around. Everyone who wishes to sell this property is present. Every hand went up. Except Dad's. Margaret nodded toward me. You may unlock the shed. The old padlock groaned as the key turned. The rusty door creaked open. A smell of cedar, dust, and old paper drifted into the summer air. Sunlight slowly revealed the inside. There were no boxes of cash. No gold. No hidden treasure. Instead, shelves. Hundreds of carefully labeled cassette tapes. Every year. From 1978 to just 6 months before Grandpa died. Each tape had a name, a date, and one handwritten word. Confession. Nobody moved. Raymond whispered. What is this? Then I noticed something else. At the center of the room stood an old wooden table. On top of it sat a tape recorder, already plugged into a battery pack. Beside it rested one final envelope. It had only 6 words written across the front. Play this before anything else. I looked at Dad. He slowly nodded. With trembling hands, I pressed the play button. Grandpa's voice filled the shed once more. If you're listening together, then someone among you has spent decades pretending to be innocent. Today, that ends. Nobody moved. Grandpa's voice echoed through the tiny shed, steady and calm. If you're listening together, then thank you for respecting my final wish. The old tape hissed softly before he continued. For almost 50 years, this shed protected something more valuable than money. He paused. The truth. Every eye in the room stayed fixed on the tape recorder. Even Raymond, who had spent days trying to break inside, looked uneasy. Grandpa continued. You're probably wondering why I recorded confessions, instead of writing them down. A faint chuckle escaped through the speaker. Because paper can be burned. Another pause. But hearing your own voice, that's much harder to deny. He let the silence settle. If you're all standing here today, then one question remains. Who destroyed this family? Margaret reached for another envelope lying beside the recorder. She looked at me. Walter left instructions. She unfolded the paper. Play tape 17 first. I searched the shelves until I found a cassette labeled 1978, tape 17 farm account. I slid it into the recorder. A click. Static. Then, a younger man's trembling voice. I don't know if I can do this. Grandpa answered gently. You don't have to if you're not ready. No. The man took a deep breath. I have to. Silence. Then the confession began. I took the money. Gasps filled the shed. Dad looked at Raymond. Raymond looked ready to collapse. But then. The voice continued. I let everyone blame Raymond because I was afraid. The voice wasn't Raymond's. It wasn't Dad's. It wasn't Grandpa's. It belonged to Aunt Susan's late husband, Frank Miller. Susan covered her mouth. No. Tears instantly filled her eyes. Frank continued on the tape. I lost everything gambling. I thought I could replace the money before anyone noticed. I couldn't. When Walter started asking questions, I stayed quiet. And Raymond got blamed. The tape ended. No one spoke. Raymond slowly sank onto an old wooden chair. 48 years. He had carried that accusation for 48 years. He whispered. I kept wondering why Dad stopped looking me in the eye. Susan began crying. I didn't know. I swear, I never knew. Dad walked toward Raymond. I should have defended you. Raymond shook his head. You believed what everyone else believed. No. Dad's voice broke. I believed what was easiest. Margaret unfolded another note. Walter says to continue. I reached for the next cassette. 1989, tape 42 Benjamin. Dad froze. That's me. His hands started shaking. I don't remember making a recording. Grandpa's voice came first. Ben, are you sure? Dad's younger voice answered. Yes. Long silence. Then. I've been angry at Raymond for years. I keep telling myself he deserved it. But the truth is, I was jealous. He was fearless. He made people laugh. I always felt invisible. I never tried to clear his name. Because part of me liked being the good son. Dad lowered his head. I forgot. He whispered. I actually forgot saying that. No one judged him. No one needed to. He was judging himself enough. Dad walked over to Raymond. I'm sorry. Raymond stared at him. You could have erased 40 years of pain. I know. I was a coward. For several long seconds. Nothing happened. Then Raymond stepped forward. And hugged him. Not tightly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough for two old brothers to finally stop carrying the same burden. One tape remained on the table. No label. Only Grandpa's handwriting. Last. Margaret looked around. Walter instructed Ethan to play this one. I swallowed. Inserted the cassette. Pressed play. Grandpa's familiar voice filled the room one final time. If you've reached this tape, then maybe you're finally listening to each other. He sounded tired. Older. I didn't build this shed to expose people. I built it because secrets grow heavier every year. They don't disappear. They become inheritances. Everyone stood silently. I could have exposed every confession the day I recorded it. But that would have created more anger. So I waited. I waited until all of you were old enough to choose. You can leave this shed today still blaming one another. Or you can finally stop carrying what never belonged to your children. His breathing became slower. There is one last confession. The room became completely still. I failed all of you. Gasps echoed around me. I was your father. I should have forced the truth into the light. Instead, I protected peace. But silence isn't peace. It's only delayed pain. His voice cracked for the first time. I'm sorry. Then he laughed softly. You know what Ethan asked me once? Grandpa, why do you keep fixing this old shed? I told him. Because wood never lies. I was wrong. It wasn't the wood. It was the people who finally chose to speak inside it. A long pause. If you're hearing this, I'm already gone. So here's my final request. Don't sell this land because you're angry. Sell it only if your hearts are lighter than when you arrived. And if they aren't, keep the farmhouse. Invite your children. Tell them the truth yourselves. Don't make them find it after your funeral. The tape clicked. It was over. Nobody spoke for what felt like forever. Finally, Raymond stood. He walked to the developer waiting outside. We're not signing anything today. The developer frowned. You've had a deal. You'll have your answer later. For now. Raymond looked back at the farmhouse. We've got 50 years to talk about. The developer quietly returned to his SUV and drove away. That evening, something happened that I had never seen before. My family sat together around Grandpa's old dining table. No lawyers. No contracts. No arguments. Just stories. Susan admitted she'd always wondered why Frank became distant before he died. Dad apologized for missing birthdays while chasing work. Raymond confessed he'd spent decades pretending not to care, because admitting the truth hurt too much. For the first time in my life, everyone listened without interrupting. 6 months later, we made a decision together. We sold part of the unused farmland. Not all of it. Only enough to secure everyone's future. The farmhouse stayed. So did the shed. We restored it instead of tearing it down. Inside, we built shelves for family photographs, journals, and voice recordings. Every Thanksgiving, one family member records a message for the next generation. Not a confession. A truth. Sometimes it's an apology. Sometimes it's gratitude. Sometimes it's simply, I love you. A year later, I visited alone. I unlocked the shed. The afternoon sun filtered through the small window. Everything smelled of fresh cedar. On Grandpa's old workbench sat one final object I'd somehow missed. A tiny wooden box. Inside was a folded note. Only one sentence. Families don't break because they make mistakes. They break because nobody is brave enough to admit them. I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket. As I locked the shed behind me, I finally understood what Grandpa had protected all those years. It was never the land. It was never the building. It wasn't even the tapes. It was the chance for the truth to arrive at exactly the moment people were finally ready to hear it. And that was the real inheritance.